About 25 years ago, I used to work at a gas station. It was one that was somewhat off a country road and only like 5 minutes from where I lived. I would work the overnight shift because the station was open 24 hours. This is something that was both creepy and easy typically. There wasn't a whole lot that had to be done overnight. The store part of the gas station was pretty small. It had a good amount of snacks and drinks, so I would do some stocking of the shelves and organizing here and there. Most of the time though, I would just sit behind the counter. We had this TV that was hanging from the ceiling in the corner that I used to watch at a really low volume. Without that, I would have been truly bored out of my mind most nights. But the TV was amazing, because this was before smartphones, so I couldn't just go online or whatever. During the day, a lot of people would drive on the road that the gas station was on, and they would stop. At night though, it was kind of the opposite. We would seldom get any customers. An occasional car would drive by and sometimes stop in for fuel, but normally if they did, they wouldn't come inside of the store. In fact, the gas station stopped being open 24/7 sometime in the late 2000s, and about 5 years ago it was converted into a smoke and vape shop. But back to the story. To be honest, when people did stop there at night, I always hoped that they wouldn't come inside, because being by myself in the middle of the night, whenever anybody came in, it always seemed kind of sketchy. There were a few strange people, but overall not that many scary experiences. One really stands out though. It was a night like any other. The time was roughly 2 o'clock in the morning, so this was among the quietest times of night for me. I was just sitting behind the counter and looking around the empty shop. To my right was the door to go inside, as well as 2 very large windows looking out to the gas pumps. Surrounding the station all around was pretty much wildlife. There was a dense woods right across the street, and next to the property was some tall grass and quite a bit of trees scattered around as well. We hadn't had any customers in the gas station in well over an hour. I don't think that I had seen a car in a long time either. I remember glancing out of the windows though and noticing what appeared to be a man. He was walking slowly from the sort of wooded field area next to the gas station and making his way towards the gas pumps. It was really strange to see because there was no real place that he would be coming from. After making his way to the pavement, he just kind of started standing around for a while. It was very strange. I kept watching him because I was very curious as to where he had come from and what he was doing. The man was bald, looked to be maybe in his 40s or so, and had a slight beard on his chin, I remember. He was also wearing sunglasses. After standing around and looking the other way mostly for like 2 or 3 minutes, he started to walk towards the gas station. I thought at that point that he was going to go inside. He walked all the way towards the doors. Then the man stopped, took out a cigarette, and started smoking it. He did not go inside the store. After smoking for a couple minutes, he then started walking away and crossed the quiet street. Then the guy literally walked right into the woods, which had me really puzzled. It was very strange because there was no path to go into the woods or anything. It was just like dense forest all around. That alone was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. But it got weirder. So maybe 30 minutes later, we still hadn't had any more customers. Out of nowhere, I saw movement outside and I looked up. I was just on time to see the same man emerging from the woods. After that, he walked across the street and back onto our property. This time though, he walked all the way to the front door and actually went inside. When he was in the shop, he started walking for the counter. I said hi to him, and the man said that he needed $1,500. I had a bad feeling when he said that, but hoped that I was misunderstanding him. I asked what he meant. The man then demanded that I give him $1,500. His voice was now angry. I looked at him, and he wasn't holding any kind of a weapon or anything, but he was leaning in fairly close. I didn't know if he had one on him, but I always kept a bottle of pepper spray just behind the counter in case. When the man demanded it again, he leaned towards me even closer and shouted. That's when I took the pepper spray, pointed it right at his face, and let it rip. The man was instantly blinded by it and moved backwards. He grabbed his eyes, and I yelled at him to get out of the store and that I was calling the police. The man backed away and thankfully left. When he got outside, he walked around covering his face, then crossed the street again and went back into the woods. It was very weird. I kept an eye out for the rest of my shift, but I didn't see the guy again. In fact, I never saw him for the rest of the time that I worked there. It was one of the weirdest situations I've ever had. For a short time period, I used to work as a customer service representative during nights. It was a job that I did from home. I would work my normal job during the day and then work the night shift at home taking calls. I had a guest room in my apartment that I worked out of, and it was normally pretty easy. I used my guest room as an office, and from like 8 o'clock at night until midnight, I sat at my desk with my headset and my computer. I was able to take calls, help customers for the business that I worked for, and stay at home. I was working a lot at the time to save up money, and I only did 2 jobs at once for several months. For this job though, I wouldn't be getting calls all the time. I'd get maybe like 10 a night, so there was a lot of downtime where I could just relax mostly, and I got paid the whole time, which was good. So, nearing the end of my shift one night, it was shortly after 11 p.m. This was not necessarily a quieter time, but it was just later. I found that there was about the same amount of calls regardless of the time, but on this night I hadn't happened to get a call in a little while. So then I got a phone call and answered, except this was not the normal customer. When I said hello, at first nobody said anything on the other end of the phone. When I said hello again, this time I heard a man's voice start to speak. He did not sound normal though. It was like he was trying to disguise his voice or something. What he said next really creeped me out. The man told me that he was outside my apartment. I said, "Come again?" The man then said that he was right outside and claimed that he could see me. I asked if this was a prank, and he started laughing this creepy laugh. I didn't recognize the voice as anybody that I would know. I asked again why he called. The guy said that he just wanted to let me know that he was right outside my place and that I should go look. I didn't believe him at all. I said, "No, you're not." Then I hung up on him because I was not willing to play games with some prank caller. But then, moments later, there was a knock on my apartment door. Instantly, I was extremely nervous. I had truly thought that it was just a prank call, but now it didn't seem like it. I stayed where I was in my office. Then there was another knock on the door. I decided to get up and go and see who was there. I walked over to my front door, but by the time I got there, I looked out of the peephole and whoever had been there was gone. Then I got another call. When I answered it, it was the same person right away. He gave me another creepy laugh and asked why I didn't answer the door. I asked who it was in a nervous voice, and then he hung up on me. I was so creeped out, fearing that I was being stalked or something, and I called the police. I told them what happened, and they said they would send an officer to my location. As I was waiting for them to arrive, I got another phone call. When I answered it, it was the same person, but just laughter. It was really creepy. Then they hung up again. When the police officer arrived at my apartment, I told him what happened, and he looked all around the building. Unfortunately, he never located who did it. After that, for the rest of my time working that job, nothing else like that happened. I still don't know who did that to me or why. For a year, a long time ago, I worked at a convenience store. It was off this road with a lot of other businesses on it. My store was like the ones connected to gas stations, except we didn't have any gas. It was just a small store with lots of drinks, snacks, and a little bit of other stuff. So basically, I would work by myself during the night at the counter. We closed at 3 a.m. every night, so it would be pretty late nights for me. Usually, not that many people would come through for my shift though, so I preferred it to working a normal shift, because though the hours might have been odd, it was significantly less work. From the time that I started, there would usually be a decent amount of customers, but then as the shift went on, it would get quieter and quieter. After midnight, we would hardly get anyone. So one night, at around midnight, I remember that nobody had been in the store for a while until this one guy walked in. When I saw him entering, the first thing that I noticed was that he was wearing a clown mask. It was kind of creepy to see at midnight, but I also just figured that it was some guy trying to be funny. It was not Halloween time, so I wasn't very amused. Of course, working by myself behind the counter, when somebody enters wearing any kind of a mask, it raises suspicions. I thought that it could potentially be a robbery. The man walked in though, got within maybe 20 feet of me, and then turned and started looking at me. As he did, he was just standing there. I said to the guy, "Very funny, pal." He didn't respond and just kept standing there and staring at me. I said, "What do you want, a prize? Best costume of the day, there you go." The man still ignored me. After like another minute of us just staring at each other, the guy finally started walking away. He moved towards the other side of the store very slowly, still looking at me. It was very strange. At last, the man walked to the doors and finally left. I was glad to see him go. For the remainder of my shift, which was about 2 or 3 hours, I didn't see the guy. There was maybe 2 or 3 total people for the rest of the time that night. I remember when I was finally off at 3 a.m., I locked up the shop and went to leave. When I was walking out, I saw the clown man a ways away. He was across the street by the corner now, walking down the sidewalk by himself. He was the only person out that I could see at that time. I thought it was weird that I was seeing him again. As I walked away to go to my car behind the shop, I remember noticing him start to look over at me. I quickly walked away though and got to my car and went home. The next night, I worked again. It was the same exact hours as I usually did, so I would be getting off at 3 a.m. Nothing really strange happened during my shift that night. There was a guy who came into the shop and looked around for kind of a long time and then left without buying anything. But other than that, things were pretty quiet. Well, that night, after I got off of work at 3 a.m., I closed up the shop, left, and went to my car again. When I got there, something really weird happened. When I opened my door, on the driver's seat, there was a clown mask, the same one that the guy had been wearing. I was so surprised to see it that I jumped back and I thought that the guy might be in my car. I looked inside though and he wasn't there. I took the mask and tossed it and then I went home. The next day I was paranoid. Everyone that came in the shop, I wondered if it was the clown guy. I didn't see him again though, and I really have no idea how he got inside my car. I thought that I locked it. I guess it's possible that I didn't, or maybe he picked the lock or something. My car was kinda old, but I really don't know for sure, and it's all very strange. When I was younger, for a while, I used to work at a grocery store. I was 19 at the time and was just working there for the summer. It was a small town grocery store in the city that I lived in, and my mom was friends with the owner. That's basically how I got the job. The only bad part was that I had to work the night shift. So right before the store would close, I would come in. There would be a list of tasks for me to do, and basically when I got them all done, I could leave and go home. Except the store closed at 9 p.m. and there was always a lot to do, and it would take me until past midnight most of the time. Sometimes I would be working until like 2 a.m. or later, and when I worked, I would be the only one in the entire store. It was a little weird to be by myself in the grocery store, and most of the lights would be out by that time as well. There were just a few dim ones, really just enough so that I could see. Overall, it was not a bad job though, because sometimes I would be able to get off a little bit early. Some of the tasks that I usually did were cleaning, always stocking a lot of shelves, and some other random stuff. I would change prices, put up and take down signs and advertisements, and get the place ready for whoever was opening the next day. The grocery store was pretty small, but it still had just about everything that you would want. One night after I came in, I started going through the tasks. It started out as a pretty typical night. After doing a little bit of cleaning, I was stocking shelves near the canned goods. Out of nowhere, I heard a sound. It was the sound of footsteps. Somebody else was walking inside the store. This made no sense. I had been working already for about 2 hours, so we had closed a long time ago. Nobody else was supposed to be there, and nothing like that had ever happened before. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The footsteps were definitely a few aisles away, and they were walking down at about an average pace. Then the footsteps started to get closer. However, they ended up stopping, seemingly not that far away from me, maybe in the next aisle over or the one after that. After not hearing the sound for a couple of minutes, I walked over to the next aisle over and looked in it. There was nobody there. I looked in the next aisle after that, and there was nobody there either. As I was walking back to where I was stocking shelves though, I heard the footsteps again. They sounded like they were behind me, but a ways back and out of my sight. I turned around and looked, but didn't see anybody. Then I spoke, asking if anybody was there. No one answered me. By that point, I was really creeped out by the whole situation. Nothing like that had ever happened before. I decided to look all around the store to see if anybody was there. So I made my way slowly closer to where I had last heard the footsteps. The store was mostly dark, except for the dim lights that were kept on overnight. Like I said, it was pretty much just enough for me to see. I looked through a few aisles without noticing anything. Then I got to one aisle and looked down it. There was a man standing in it. As soon as I saw him, he looked over at me. Then he turned and started walking away out of the aisle. I shouted at him that we were closed and he had to leave now. He didn't say anything back. I walked after him in his direction. However, I had lost him and had no clue where he was anymore because he had quickly gone out of my sight. I heard him walking for a while, but then I stopped hearing him. At that point, I was just walking up and down all the aisles in the store. I was really nervous, wondering why the man was there and what he wanted. I should have called the police right away, but I was practically a kid still, and I guess I panicked. So after walking up and down the aisles for a little while, I suddenly heard the footsteps behind me. I looked back and saw the guy approaching me like 20 feet away. It was one of the scariest things I've ever seen. At that point, I just took off running. I made my way to the door and just bolted out of there. I ran to my car and drove home to my parents' house, which was pretty close by. Then I called the police. After coming to my senses and the police were there, I went back to the grocery store. My boss got called as well. The police found a man hiding in the back room. Apparently, he had been in the store before close and then just stayed in and hid someplace. Why, I don't know. I'm really glad that I got out of there when I did, though.
This happened to me almost 8 years ago, and I've never stopped thinking about it. I was in my early 20s at the time and was camping out in the wilderness of Upper Idaho. I wouldn't say I was an experienced camper yet, but I did go out pretty frequently on long hikes and knew the basics of camping. Also, in that territory, there was a lot of wildlife, including black bears and grizzly bears, so being prepared was a must, which deterred a lot of casual hikers and campers. Not many people live up there either, and you'd only see the occasional tourist also hiking a trail. Most of the campsites in Upper Idaho are not very crowded. That being said, although admittedly unnecessary, I tried to stay away from those tourist-type spots and stick to lesser-known trails. For this trip, I'd chosen one that was just outside of the big mountain range that was well known. This trail just went through the forest and along the hills bordering the mountain, leading to a nice open spot with views of the mountain range. The nearest trail I knew of was 3 miles away that led to a small lake, which I assumed might have a couple other people, so that's why I skipped it. I was right though. My whole hike there, nobody else was around. The trail seemed basically unused, and when I got to the campground, it was open and empty. I set up my tent on the far side and found some big stones to build a fire pit with. I think I had 2 or 3 hours of daylight left, so I wasn't planning on doing much for the rest of the day. Just sit around the campsite and think about my plans for tomorrow. When the sun set, I built up the fire and roasted some marshmallows while stargazing, the occasional wildlife calling out. But then something interrupted the silence. A repeated crunch of leaves coming from out in the woods. After a second, it was pretty obvious that it was a person walking. I didn't know what to do, except sit there and stare in that direction, kind of just shocked and confused why someone was out there, until they showed up at the edge of my campsite. It was a man, but with the shadows from the campfire flickering over them, I couldn't make out much to identify them with. I could see they had a typical camping backpack on, and that was about it. They stood there and looked at me, then at the rest of my campsite, and before I could say anything, they said sorry, then turned around and walked back the exact way I heard them come from. Also, the way they said sorry was like they were trying to be quiet. It was just barely louder than a whisper. It was really strange. What were they even sorry for? They had to be looking for a campsite. There's no way they were just walking around at night like that for no reason. It felt really, I guess, unsettling. I didn't feel in danger, but the way they acted was just out of the usual behavior of any hiker I'd ever come across. Their footsteps walked away, turning into the subtle, quiet night it was just moments ago, as if nothing had happened. Despite the unusual interruption, I ended up going back to stargazing and relaxing only a few minutes afterward. I hoped wherever that guy was heading, he'd make it there soon, and safely, but aside from that, I didn't think too much more about it. Several hours went by, or at least it felt like that. Clouds started to roll in, blocking out the moon and stars and casting a shadow over the entire forest. I wasn't exactly tired or ready to sleep yet, so I sat along the campfire and hoped I'd eventually get bored and sleepy enough to call it a night. But then I heard footsteps again. They were more rushed this time, almost like panicked footsteps running through the woods in the exact same place the man came from earlier in the night. I stood up, getting worried as they approached. Then he came into the light. I could tell by the backpack and his general figure that it was the same hiker from before. He walked further up this time, enough for me to see him better. He had a medium scruffy beard and oily black hair, along with some signs of distress on his clothes, as well as dirt scuffed over his face. And his eyes were wide, like he was scared, yet his mouth was straight and emotionless. "Is everything okay? You probably should have made it to your campsite by now. It's pretty late." The man stood there, catching his breath, but keeping on guard. His eyes looked over my right shoulder for a second, then back at me. "Are you lost? Maybe I can help," I said. He then muttered no under his breath, saying he was just hiking out in the woods and didn't mean to bother me. He spoke slowly though, and the whole time his eyes were constantly shifting to something on the right side of me. He'd only look for a split second, then his eyes would lock back onto me. Listen, you look pretty nervous. I can help. Maybe send a radio message for you, or whatever you need." He seemed to ignore what I said, but he then suddenly locked his eyes on me, more intently than before. "You're camping here right now. Why?" The way he asked it was really unsettling. His eyes darted to my right again, and I couldn't resist the urge to look over my shoulder. Empty, dark woods. I saw nothing. I was getting really creeped out now, and wasn't sure how much more I wanted to talk to this guy, let alone try to help him with whatever was going on. Then he asked something even more creepy. "Is it just you here? Are you alone? Where are the others?" Taken aback by the question, I hesitated to respond right away, and before I could even answer, he spoke again. "Have you been following me?" Something was off. His manner was changing and he was tensing up. I said no, and that I didn't know what he was talking about. But then his eyes shifted onto something over my shoulder again. However, this time, they didn't shift back to me. His wide, hollow eyes were locked onto something. He asked one last question. "Then why are you with her?" I instantly turned around and looked over my right shoulder, but my eyes fell on nothing. Still just empty, dark woods. I looked back at the man. His face fell into terror, still staring beyond me, before he suddenly broke out into a sprint, running deeper into the woods. Within seconds, he was past all the lights and completely gone. The direction he ran was nowhere near the trail, or really anything at all. My heart was still racing though. I was looking all around, especially behind me, trying to figure out what the hell that guy was talking about, and what he was seeing. In those brief moments after he asked, "Then why are you with her?" I thought I'd connected everything, that this man was being followed by some woman or group in the woods. And when I looked over my shoulder, I fully expected to see her standing behind me, deranged and terrifying. But now I didn't know what to believe. I was scared shitless though, and was absolutely not staying any longer. I gathered up everything and started moving. Even though I saw the guy run in the other direction from the trail, I was still on edge the entire walk. Every slight noise had me startled and expecting to see some woman following me, or whoever the hell he was talking about. But I never did. I made it to my car and left. The following morning, I decided to put in a note with the police station near me about the guy out there, because with more time to think about it, I was pretty worried about him. While I don't have an exact explanation for what went on that night, I can provide a decent theory for the situation after consulting dozens of people over the years. The most likely and tragic explanation is the man may have gotten lost and been out there for a very long time, probably becoming extremely hungry and dehydrated to the point of near insanity and paranoia, thinking something or someone was following him through the woods at night. Unfortunately, with him not being in the right state of mind, he didn't know help when he saw it. When he found me, he was probably too paranoid to know that I could have saved him, giving him food and water and let him out of the woods. He might have been so out of it that he didn't even know he was lost anymore and was too caught up in the paranoia of whoever he thought was following him. While this is the most probable cause of the man's behavior and what happened that night, there's still no saying if it's actually true. There's a chance he really was being followed and wasn't sure whether or not I was just another stalker part of the group and didn't trust me. If that was the case, then him freaking me out that night likely saved my life from whoever else was out there. However, we probably will never know for sure. The man was never found or spotted since, so unfortunately it seems he never made it out of the woods. I was at home this night, planning to pull an all-nighter to catch up on some work papers that I needed to have done. I procrastinated just a bit too long with these, and due to a couple other things coming up, I really had no choice but to stay up and finish it tonight. I brewed a cup of coffee, went upstairs to my office, and closed myself in to keep out any distractions and just power through the night. I did surprisingly well for a few hours, sipping on my coffee and locking in. But I could feel myself start to fade as my coffee ran out, and so did my energy. I thought maybe stretching my legs for a minute and going downstairs to make another cup would help me reset. I got up and walked down to the kitchen, but as the coffee brewed, I felt noticeably colder than I was in the rest of the house. Like as if there were a cold breeze blowing through the downstairs floor. I went and checked the thermostat, and the heat was on, but it was several degrees lower than it should have been. So I did a little investigating, and happened to notice a window in the back of the living room was open. Now, I did open my downstairs windows fairly often during the day, but as far as I knew, I'd never forgotten to close them before. Also, this one was wide open, not just a small crack like I usually did. Understandably, I was a bit shaken as I approached it and looked at it for a moment. The thought of someone having opened it and gotten inside crept into my mind. However, I saw nothing else to justify that. I stuck my head outside and looked at the ground beneath the window and saw no footprints or disturbances in the dirt. And there was nothing on the window, like I'd expect to see from someone crawling in. In moments like these, your mind always wants to assume you're overthinking it, and that something like this would never really happen to you. I started to assume that I just cracked open the window a bit more than usual today, and forgot to close it. With no other signs to determine otherwise, I closed the window, grabbed my fresh cup of coffee, and went back upstairs. Now, over the course of the next 30 minutes, I found my mind still wandering a bit, not fully satisfied with the conclusion I came to, so I got up and quickly gave a look around the house, just so I could be absolutely certain I was alone. I found nothing and went back to work. Another hour went by. I was mentally exhausted from trying to get this done, but a sudden thump behind me instantly woke me up. It was loud, as if it were just behind my desk, but nothing was back there. I knew my bedroom was right on the other side of that wall, and figured it had to be something from in there. But the sound was far too loud to be ignored, and with the whole window thing from earlier, it was hard to keep myself from thinking the worst this time. Still, I got up and walked into the hallway and opened the bedroom door. I scanned the room from the hallway before walking in slowly. From the doorway, everything looked normal. You'd think such a loud sound would easily be identifiable, like something having fallen on the ground. But it wasn't. The floor was clear of anything, and as I searched the rest of the bedroom, there wasn't a single thing off about it. I was honestly starting to believe that pulling this all-nighter was just making me go crazy. I went back to the office, but for the next 15 minutes, it was insanely hard to focus. I knew I heard a thump behind me. It was so loud. How could it just be nothing? Eventually, my focus broke, and I spun around in my chair looking behind me at where the sound had come from just 15 minutes ago. As I stared at the wall thinking about it, I suddenly felt stupid. There was a closet right there. It was just a small, thin closet that I used for nothing but storage of old clothes and winter jackets. I had forgotten it even existed. Curious, but not really thinking I'd find anything, I got up and walked over to it, carelessly sliding open the door. My breath left my lungs, a surge of fear crippling over my body. I was face to face with a stranger. He was only inches from me, in the back of the closet behind all the jackets. If not for the thin layer of clothes between us, he probably could have reached out and grabbed me before I even had a chance to run. I heard the entire closet tear apart as the unknown man forced his way out to chase me. As I scurried into the hallway, the man called out my name, instantly sending a shiver through me. His voice wasn't one I knew though. It was gritty and disturbing the way he said my name, as if he knew me. I made it out of the house, as it seemed the man put more effort into trying to convince me to stop running, rather than chasing me. I made it to a neighbor's house around the corner, relentlessly hitting their door until they answered and called the police for me. The man was no longer in the house when they searched it. There weren't even really any signs onto where he ran off to. And that's pretty much where it's been left at. Some creepy, disturbing, unknown man climbed through one of my downstairs windows in the middle of the night, carefully sneaking around the house and getting to my office closet, probably while I left to check the house after noticing the window. That means that for likely over an hour, the man was right behind me, watching me as I sat at my desk working. Even worse, he knew my name, which means it definitely was a planned break-in from a potential stalker. So it's hard knowing the possibility that he might come back. Had I not pulled an all-nighter that night and just gone to sleep, I very well may not be here right now. This was only a month ago. It was the weekend, and while I usually chose to stay home and do nothing, this Saturday was different. One of my best friends was celebrating her birthday, so I kinda had to go. It wasn't supposed to be a big party, only our close group of friends, maybe having a couple drinks and talking for a few hours. I lived in an apartment, just a 10-minute drive from my friend's house, and around 6:30 I drove over there. The party was nothing special. It wasn't even really a party, just a social gathering, I guess. However, we did end up drinking a bit while talking, and eventually, at just about 1 a.m., most people had either left or decided to spend the night. I really didn't like sleeping at anywhere but my own home and bed, but I also was a little tipsy still, and wasn't going to risk driving. Maybe, against my better judgment, I decided I'd just walk back to my apartment. My friends said it was good for me to leave my car parked in their driveway, and I'd made the walk plenty of times before. It was just 25 to 30 minutes, and mostly through the quiet suburbs. I said bye to the rest of my friends that were still there, then set off on the walk home. The weather was calm, and the walk started out well. The whole neighborhood was silent and still. No moving cars or people outside, or even any lights on in any of the homes. Everyone was probably sleeping already. At one point as I walked though, a sudden pair of headlights came down the road. They weren't too bright, and they were going slowly until they got really close to where I was and rolled to a stop. They cracked their window, but with it being dark and them not fully rolling it down, I couldn't really see them at all. A man's voice called out, asking if I was okay or needed a ride anywhere. I said I was fine and thanked him, and without any further conversation, they drove off. I thought nothing of it. From his voice, he sounded like he genuinely wanted to know if I was okay. I kept walking along the same road. Another couple minutes went by, as the neighborhood was just as quiet as before. But then, a street sign in front of me reflected a light from behind me. I turned around, seeing that same car coming down the road, opposite of the way he came down before. He ended up pulling off to the side of the road though, and parking rather than passing by me. I still found it strange that he turned around and came back this way, only to stop and park as soon as he was in view of me. Seemed like a really big coincidence. I kept walking, checking behind me a few times, but the guy never left his car, and eventually he was out of sight. I made it to the next section of the neighborhood, hoping this was nothing to worry about. But of course, walking alone in the middle of the night made everything feel extra suspicious. I started to feel better with every passing minute though. I was only about 10 minutes away from my apartment at this point, when I suddenly noticed a car parked up ahead. It was parked in the street with its headlights on, but not on the side of the street or on the curb. It was right in the middle of the road. As I got closer, I was able to make out more and see that it was definitely the same car from before. I felt a lump in my throat, knowing the chances of this just being a coincidence were getting lesser and lesser. From where I was, there were really only 2 routes to get to my apartment from. Usually, I just walked along this road because it would take me most of the way there, but I knew there was also a park up ahead that had a walking path cutting through the woods. I rarely used it because most of the time I made this walk, it was at night, and the path through the woods didn't have any lights or anything, so it was usually safer just to stay on the street. I was thinking this might be a scenario where it would be less risky to go through the woods, rather than walking past the car that was clearly watching me a bit too much for comfort. However, as I got closer to where I knew the entrance to the trail was, I realized the car was parked strangely close to it, like they were only a little bit ahead of it. So I could make it to the path before passing the car, but it almost seemed too perfect. As I got closer and closer, the more I looked out at the woods, the more uneasy I felt. I had to go with my gut. I kept walking, past the entrance to the woods, and toward the car. I held my breath as I passed it, but nothing happened. Once I got to the front of the car, I looked back, and through the windshield, I could see that nobody was inside. This car that had been following me and parked right in the middle of the road with its headlights on was empty. After a few seconds of thinking, I looked further back toward the woods, and barely through the dark, I could see the figure of a man standing out from behind the trees, watching me. I took no more chances. I started running, and it was only a few seconds later that I heard the man get into his car. I pulled my phone out as I ran, and thankfully that must have deterred him, because instead of chasing, he made a U-turn and left. I didn't stop running until I got home. Afterward, I told the police about what seemed like an attempted kidnapping. It was all just too coincidental to not be. What's scary to think is if I hadn't listened to my gut and did the obvious choice of cutting through the woods, I would have fallen perfectly for that man's trap of him waiting in there for me to do exactly that. Being out there in the woods at night with him would have surely left me no chance of escape. It's only been a month since, and with only a description of his car and his voice, it's unlikely they'll ever find or convict anyone.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.